Before anyone realized the truth, this man had a badge, a uniform, a gun, and complete authority. People saluted him. They followed his orders. They trusted his decisions. He arrested citizens. He commanded officers. He represented the law, and none of it was real. For years, an entire town believed he was their protector. In reality, he was a fraud. His name was Gerald Nash, and he built a life by pretending to be something he never was. To understand how a man with no real police training managed to control entire communities, we must go back to the beginning. Long before the sirens, the uniforms, and the power, there was a man desperate to be respected. Gerald Nash grew up in Texas, in an environment where authority, masculinity, and reputation were highly valued. From a young age, he was fascinated by law enforcement. He admired police officers. He respected uniforms. He was drawn to the idea of control. To him, a badge represented more than a job. It represented identity, status, power, protection, and most importantly, fear. People feared the badge, and that meant they obeyed it. As a young man, Nash attempted to enter law enforcement legitimately, but he struggled. Background issues, lack of qualifications, and behavioral problems prevented him from building a real career. Doors closed, opportunities disappeared, and frustration grew. For most people, this would have been the end. For Nash, it was the beginning. Instead of accepting rejection, he chose deception. He began studying police procedures. He memorized terminology. He learned how departments worked. He observed how officers spoke and acted. He learned how to look legitimate. Soon he started collecting police equipment, uniforms, badges, radios, weapons. Some were stolen, some were purchased illegally, some were obtained through lies. Piece by piece, he built the image of a real officer. Then he created documents, fake certifications, fake resumes, fake references. Everything looked authentic, and most departments never checked deeply. Because in small towns, trust replaces verification. In rural communities, police departments are often understaffed and underfunded. Hiring processes can be informal. Background checks may be incomplete. References may not be verified. Nash understood this weakness, and he exploited it. He applied for law enforcement positions using his false identity. At first, he worked in minor roles: reserve officer, volunteer deputy, part-time security. Each job gave him more credibility. Each uniform made him look more legitimate. Each paycheck made him feel more powerful. Slowly, he moved up. Supervisors saw him as motivated. Co-workers saw him as dedicated. Citizens saw him as trustworthy. No one imagined the truth. Behind the scenes, he was living a double life. Every promotion increased his risk. Every new responsibility increased the danger of exposure. But he thrived on it. The fear, the secrecy, the control. It became addictive. Eventually, something extraordinary happened. Gerald Nash was appointed as a police chief, a man with fake credentials, now in charge of enforcing the law. He had access to files. He commanded officers. He influenced investigations. He represented the department publicly. He was no longer pretending on the sidelines. He was at the center. In one small Texas town, residents believed they were protected by a professional leader. In reality, they were being ruled by an imposter, and no one knew, yet. Once Gerald Nash became police chief, his life changed overnight. He no longer had to pretend quietly. Now he was in charge. He controlled schedules. He approved investigations. He supervised officers. He decided who was promoted. He decided who was punished. In the eyes of the town, he was the law. Residents saw him at community events. He attended city meetings. He spoke to the media. He represented safety and order, and people believed him. Few questioned his background. Few asked for records. Few demanded proof, because authority creates comfort. When someone wears a badge and speaks with confidence, most people assume legitimacy. Nash understood this perfectly. He made sure to act like the ideal leader. He arrived early. He stayed late. He volunteered for extra duties. He spoke passionately about protecting the community. To outsiders, he looked dedicated. To insiders, he looked ambitious. But behind closed doors, problems began to appear. Officers started noticing inconsistencies. Nash sometimes misunderstood basic procedures. He made strange legal mistakes. He avoided detailed questions about training. He became defensive when challenged. Some colleagues felt uneasy, but they remained silent. Why? Because questioning the chief was risky. In small departments, careers are fragile. Speaking out can mean losing your job. It can mean being isolated. And Nash knew that. He used fear strategically. He punished officers who disagreed. He reassigned critics. He controlled evaluations. He threatened discipline. Slowly, dissent disappeared. Anyone who doubted him learned to stay quiet. Meanwhile, Nash began abusing his power. With no real training and no oversight, he started bending the rules. He made questionable arrests. He conducted improper searches. He ignored legal procedures. He manipulated reports. In some cases, citizens were detained without proper cause. In others, investigations were mishandled. Evidence was lost. Witness statements were altered. Records were incomplete. Each mistake put innocent people at risk. But no one outside the department noticed, because everything was hidden inside paperwork, and paperwork was controlled by Nash. Some residents began noticing strange behavior. Traffic stops felt aggressive. Interactions felt intimidating. Complaints went unanswered. People whispered, but few complained formally. Why? Because complaining to the police meant complaining to Nash. He controlled internal affairs. He controlled discipline. He controlled records. There was no independent oversight. It was the perfect environment for deception. As months passed, Nash became more confident. He stopped being cautious. He started believing his own lie. He began introducing himself proudly as chief. He gave speeches about leadership. He lectured young officers. He acted as if he had earned everything. The imposter had become the authority, yet cracks were forming. In neighboring towns, law enforcement agencies began exchanging information, training records, certification lists, employment histories. One investigator noticed something odd. Nash's name did not appear in certain databases. His certifications were incomplete. Some documents seemed outdated. Others were missing. At first, it seemed like a clerical error, but questions grew. A regional agency attempted to verify his credentials. They contacted former departments. Some had no record of him. Others reported short, unclear employment histories. Pieces did not fit. Quietly, an internal review began. Officials started checking. Training certificates, fingerprint records, academy graduation lists, background reports. The deeper they looked, the worse it became. No police academy graduation, no verified certifications, no legitimate training history. The man leading a department was never properly trained, and possibly never legally qualified. Investigators were stunned. How had this happened? How had a fraud reached such power? The answer was simple. No one had checked. For years, departments trusted paperwork without verifying it. They trusted references without calling them. They trusted appearance over evidence. Nash had exploited every weakness. As the investigation continued, officials discovered that some documents had been altered. Dates were changed. Signatures were forged. Logos were copied. The evidence was undeniable. This was not an administrative mistake. It was deliberate fraud. Meanwhile, Nash sensed danger. He noticed unusual questions. He noticed requests for records. He noticed outside investigators visiting. His confidence began to crack. He became nervous. He became irritable. He became paranoid. He started blaming others. He accused officers of betrayal. He tightened control. But it was too late. The truth was spreading. Soon, state authorities became involved. They launched a formal investigation. Subpoenas were issued. Files were seized. Interviews were conducted. Officers were questioned. City officials were questioned. Nash was questioned. At first, he denied everything. He claimed misunderstandings. He blamed clerical errors. He insisted he was qualified. But the evidence was overwhelming. When confronted with proof, his story changed. He gave inconsistent explanations. He contradicted himself. He became defensive. The mask was slipping, and the town was about to learn a terrifying truth. The man who had enforced the law had never been legally authorized to do so. Every arrest, every investigation, every decision was now under suspicion, and everything was about to collapse. When the investigation into Gerald Nash became official, secrecy was no longer possible. Word began spreading quietly through government offices, police departments, and City Hall. Something was wrong, and soon, the entire town would know. State investigators completed their review and delivered their findings to local authorities. The conclusion was devastating. Gerald Nash had never completed a certified police academy. He did not hold valid law enforcement credentials. Several documents in his personnel file were forged. His employment history was false. The man who had led the police department was an imposter. In early morning hours, officials called an emergency meeting. City council members, legal advisors, department supervisors, state representatives. They gathered behind closed doors. The mood was tense. Some were angry. Some were embarrassed. Some were terrified, because the consequences were enormous. If Nash was not legally qualified, then his authority was invalid, which meant arrests could be challenged, investigations could be reopened, convictions could be overturned. Years of police work were now questionable. The legal system in the town was shaking. Within days, state authorities moved forward. They suspended Nash immediately. His badge was confiscated. His weapon was removed. His access was revoked. For the first time in years, he was powerless. News of the scandal reached reporters. At first, it appeared as a small headline. Police chief under investigation. But it quickly exploded. Journalists uncovered details, forged documents, fake certifications, missing records. Television stations arrived. National outlets followed. The story spread beyond the town. How did a fake cop run a police department? How long did officials know? Who failed to check? Residents were shocked. Many refused to believe it. He helped my family. He arrested criminals. He kept us safe. He seemed honest. Others felt betrayed. How could they let this happen? How many cases are invalid? Who is responsible? Trust in local government collapsed overnight. People stopped calling the police. Community meetings became heated. Citizens demanded answers. Some shouted. Some cried. Some walked out. The mayor faced intense pressure. City officials released statements promising transparency. But many believed it was too late. Behind the scenes, prosecutors began reviewing cases. Every arrest signed by Nash, every warrant he approved, every investigation he led. Legal teams combed through records. Some convictions were appealed. Some cases were dismissed. Some evidence was ruled inadmissible. Criminals were released. Victims were re-traumatized. Families were furious. All because of one lie. Meanwhile, Gerald Nash was being interrogated. Investigators confronted him with evidence, forged signatures, fake certificates, false resumes. At first, he remained defiant. He claimed he had learned on the job. He insisted he was just as good as trained officers. He argued that his work proved his ability. But ability did not matter. The law required certification, and he had none. Eventually, he admitted the truth. He confessed that he had falsified documents. He admitted to lying on applications. He acknowledged deceiving departments. He claimed he only wanted to serve. He claimed he loved law enforcement. But prosecutors saw something else. They saw deliberate fraud. They saw identity deception. They saw abuse of authority. In formal charges, Nash was accused of forgery fraud, impersonation of a public official, tampering with records, misuse of official authority. He was arrested and booked. The image of the former police chief in handcuffs spread across the media. For residents, It was surreal. The man who had once arrested others was now being arrested himself. Court proceedings began months later. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled benches. Citizens watched silently. Former officers avoided eye contact. Prosecutors laid out the timeline. They showed how Nash applied for jobs, how he submitted fake documents, how departments failed to verify, how he climbed the ranks. Defense attorneys argued that he had performed well. They claimed no malicious intent. They said he never meant harm. But the judge disagreed. The case was not about performance. It was about deception. It was about illegally holding power. It was about undermining the justice system. Witnesses testified. Former co-workers described their doubts. City officials admitted mistakes. Investigators explained failures. The picture was clear. This was not one failure. It was many. A system that trusted too easily. Officials who avoided responsibility. Departments that skipped verification. Nash had exploited all of it. In the end, he was convicted, sentenced to prison, banned from law enforcement, stripped of authority forever. But the damage remained. Even after the trial, the town struggled. New leadership was installed. New policies were created. Background checks were strengthened. Training requirements were reinforced. Oversight committees were formed. But trust takes years to rebuild. Some residents never forgave the system. They continued to question every arrest, every officer, every decision. Because once trust is broken, it rarely fully returns. The scandal became a case study in law enforcement academies, a warning about complacency, about weak verification, about blind trust. And one final truth emerged. Gerald Nash did not succeed because he was brilliant. He succeeded because no one was watching closely enough. When the courtroom emptied and the headlines faded, one question remained. Why? Why would a man risk everything to pretend to be something he was not? Why spend years building a lie that could collapse at any moment? To understand Gerald Nash, we have to look beyond the badge. Imposters like Nash are rarely motivated by money alone. They are driven by identity. Psychologists who study long-term impersonators often describe a deep internal void, a need to become someone more powerful than they feel inside. For Nash, the uniform was not just clothing. It was transformation. Without it, he was ordinary. With it, he was feared, respected, obeyed. The badge gave him structure. The weapon gave him authority. The title gave him importance. And the town gave him validation. Imposter syndrome usually describes capable people who feel unqualified. Nash was the opposite. He was unqualified, but felt entitled. He believed he deserved the role. He convinced himself that performance mattered more than legality, that results mattered more than truth. And this mindset is dangerously common. He did not wake up one day planning to collapse a justice system. He likely started small. One exaggerated resume line, one false certification, one lie to open a door, then another, and another, until the lie became his entire identity. At some point, there was no way back. Admitting the truth would mean admitting failure, so he doubled down. Many imposters share similar traits: high confidence, low empathy, strong need for admiration, ability to mimic authority. They study behavior, they copy language, they imitate posture, they become convincing. Because most people do not expect deception in positions of trust. We expect criminals to look suspicious. We expect fraud to look obvious. But deception often wears a uniform, and that is what makes it powerful. The case also exposed something deeper about institutions. Systems often prioritize speed over scrutiny. Small towns struggle with resources. Background checks cost money. Verification takes time. Hiring quickly feels efficient. Trust feels easier, and complacency becomes routine. No one believed they were hiring a fraud. They believed they were hiring a solution. That assumption created vulnerability. The legal aftermath of the case continued for years. Attorneys challenged cases. Some arrests were reviewed. Insurance claims were filed. Internal policies were rewritten. Departments across Texas quietly audited their own hiring practices, because if it happened there, it could happen anywhere. For the citizens, the psychological impact lingered. Many reported a loss of faith in authority. They questioned whether uniforms meant anything at all. Parents hesitated to tell their children to trust the police. That sentence felt different now, more complicated, more fragile. Trust, once automatic, became conditional. And perhaps that is the most lasting damage. Gerald Nash eventually disappeared from public life. His name faded from headlines. But the case remains a warning, a reminder that authority must be verified, that systems must be checked, that trust must be earned, not assumed. Because the most dangerous lies are not loud. They are quiet. They sit in offices. They attend meetings. They shake hands. They make decisions. And they look legitimate. Before anyone realized the truth, a town believed it was protected. In reality, it was led by deception. The badge was real. The uniform was real. The power was real. But the man wearing them was not. And that is what makes this story terrifying. Because it forces us to ask, how many positions of power today are held by people we have never truly verified? How many systems rely on paperwork instead of proof? How many communities trust without checking? If this story shocked you, subscribe to Voicerax. Here, we uncover real stories of deception, crime, and psychological manipulation that reveal how fragile trust can be. Leave your thoughts in the comments because the next story might be hiding behind a badge you recognize.